This was the funeral of a Catholic called Lachlan McGinn, held last August in County Down. His wife and young children were at home when he was shot there by loyalist terrorists. Lachlan McGinn was Northern Ireland's victim number 2,754. But his murder stands out from many others, first for the savagery that followed it. The hatred for Lachlan McGinn was so intense, his grave was even dug up.
The coffin lid was damaged, and the nameplate was removed, and the crucifix was removed.
Someone's actually opened the coffin?
They tried to open the coffin. There was 2 screws missing out of it. And they tried to prise the lid of the coffin open and damaged it with spades. And it seemed to be in a frenzy.
How has that affected you?
Just devastating. Broke my heart.
The more lasting controversy is that after Lachlan McGinn's murder, loyalist terrorists claimed they had access to security force intelligence. This file, alleging he was an IRA suspect, was leaked to the terrorist group that claimed his murder. It was one of hundreds of intelligence documents that loyalists said they'd received from sympathizers within the army and police, and newspapers were deluged with copies to prove it. Confidential files were even plastered on walls in Belfast to challenge and embarrass John Stevens, the English police officer sent in to investigate the collusion affair. John Stevens, the Deputy Chief Constable for Cambridgeshire, and his team have been in Belfast since September. His report, due next month, is eagerly awaited by Catholics.
You say how impartial or how thorough the investigation will be?
Be totally impartial, I can assure you.
Catholic suspicions of collusion have had little proof until now.
These revelations that they were in collusion with the Protestant assassins, of course, is devastating, because the Catholic community say, well, who is going to protect us? And the answer some people might give to that is the Provision IRA, which is a total disaster.
Father Dennis Fall echoes the views of many moderate Catholics in Northern Ireland today.
Let us proclaim the mystery of faith.
He has fought hard to persuade his community to support constitutional politics rather than the IRA. The security forces are predominantly Protestant. Catholic confidence in these forces is at the heart of the policing problem in Northern Ireland, where the communities are so sharply divided.
If you don't have confidence in something, you have fear. And there is that fear presence amongst the Catholic nationalist people in Northern Ireland. And where you have fear, you have the best and the strongest breeding ground for terrorist activities.
But I agree with you. I agree with you that the confidence of the nationalist community in the security forces is of critical importance, and we attack it on a very broad front.
Catholics have, however, heard this kind of assurance from secretaries of state before. And their faith in the impartiality of the security forces is not likely to be restored by next month's report into the leaks affair by John Stevens. That report is expected to show that many of the leaks to loyalist terrorists have come from one branch of the security forces in particular, the Ulster Defence Regiment. Panorama has conducted its own investigation into the UDR. And our investigation shows that the government's claim the regiment acts in an even-handed way isn't always borne out. Londonderry before Christmas. Once again, the loyalists were on the march, among them a few off-duty UDR men. Almost all UDR soldiers are Protestants, many from the loyalist working class. The right to march anywhere in Ulster is a sacred tenet of loyalism. But at this all-day affair, raw sectarian instincts were also on display. This parade reviles the memory of a British colonel called Lundy, who was prepared to do a deal with the Catholic army. 300 years on, and the loyalists still regard Lundy as a traitor to their cause. From this culture, a degree of collusion between UDR soldiers and secret terrorist groups that murder IRA suspects is perhaps inevitable. While in the UDR, this man was convicted of being a member of the most violent of the loyalist terrorist groups, the Ulster Volunteer Force, or UVF. He didn't want us to reveal his identity for fear of IRA reprisals.
By joining the UVF, I just looked on it as enabling me to play a further part in combating the IRA, or helping those men who were prepared to fight the IRA actively. I didn't feel disloyal in any sense to the UDR. I still felt a sense of pride of being in the UDR and in the UVF too. I think they were, to me anyway, they were two sides of the same coin. As a matter of principle, any information I got about Republicans, I made sure I passed it on to the UVF.
As a matter of principle?
As a matter of principle, yes. I think the Protestant people need to know who their enemies are.
Well, the flaw is their history. Over the last 20 years, over 100 men, 120 men or so of the UDR have been involved in serious crimes and have been imprisoned, and a number have been involved in sectarian assassination of Catholics. Well, any regiment in the British Army with a history like that would probably have been disbanded long ago.
When the UDR was formed by a Labour government in 1970, most applicants were reserve policemen known as the B Specials, regarded by Catholics as blatantly sectarian. Ever since, Catholics have been encouraged to join.
In fact, there's been 20%, which is a healthy beginning. I want more than 20%, and particularly in some areas where we've asked the advisory committee to do its best to tell us how to get more Catholics. But 20% isn't a bad figure to begin with.
Of the regiment's 6,500 soldiers today, less than 3% are Catholics. Catholics were driven out mainly because they were targeted by the IRA, but also by the sectarianism of some Protestant soldiers. The UDR is better trained than it was. It's taken over most of the routine security work from the regular army.
Zero, this Yankee 10 Alpha, over. Yankee 10 Alpha, roger. A vehicle checkpoint now.
But for most Catholics, the vehicle checkpoint provides the main point of contact with the UDR. It's also the main point of friction. There have been well-documented petty acts of sectarian behaviour by UDR soldiers, for example, Catholics held up on their way to Mass, and such incidents still happen today.
I know a Catholic father of 14 children, and father and mother, and every time they go down to the village where they live, they are stopped by the UDR if they happen to be on the road, commanded by the same particular officer. They're put out on the road. The girls' stuff is all searched. These men come along with their dirty hands and put it through all the girls' clothes in their suitcases, or maybe they're going to their work in the nearby town. The mother, her prayer book is taken out and they go through the prayer book page by page. Her asthma inhaler is taken out and it's broken into its component parts by the dirty hands of this soldier and handed back to her, and she's supposed to put that into her mouth if she gets an asthma attack. And these people would be described as SDLP supporters. They are not people involved in sectarian crime in any way or in terrorist activities in any way, and would not be.
You're saying that's the way men in uniform behave. You're saying most UDR men
No,
behave
not
like that?
most UDR. I've said that again and again. I'm not saying most. Most UDR men are very decent men, good, law-abiding men who are well-disciplined. There is the minority in it who do this.
Jim Canning is an independent Catholic councillor well respected by moderate loyalists. He says UDR discipline has improved, but many Catholics still see it as a local Protestant militia.
Certainly the message that's taken is that we are the bosses. We are in charge, and we are letting you know that we're in charge. And that causes a great deal of offence, particularly among innocent people. And a lot of young people get harassment on the roads, and really this only leads them, it actually drives them into paramilitary groups. They see that as a form of redress, unfortunately.
Paul Creelman is a Republican who alleges he suffered months of UDR harassment. He also claims it was a factor that finally pushed him into the IRA. In 1985, he was released from jail after serving 8 years for the attempted murder of a policeman. Nevertheless, he says, the local police accept he's renounced violence and hardly bother him, but not the UDR.
It's got very, very sinister now. They have shouted at me, "We're going to blow your big fat head off." That big fat head is just ripe for the lifting. I was on my own. They've stopped me 6 times in the one day. They've stopped me 3 times out walking the dogs within a space of 500 yards, and put me through all the motions. Asked me the same questions 3 or 4 times each time I've been stopped. There's times whenever I be standing here and these people are belittling me, they're degrading me, they're humiliating me. See, for about a second I'd say to myself, I know what I would give you, boy. Now I get about a mile up the road and then I'll just wise up, back to catch myself on again and get a grip. Like, what am I to do? Who am I to turn to? I'd say these people drive quite a few young fellas into, or if you want to call it, under the arms of violence, or down the path of violence, or down the road of violence, or...
Despite Catholic misgivings, the UDR enjoys unequivocal support from the government.
Do you have confidence in the UDR?
Yes, indeed, of course. The UDR have done remarkable work. As you know, they have suffered greatly.
The government stresses the regiment is an integral part of the British Army. Its senior officers are predominantly English, seconded from other regiments.
What we say to the Catholic community is, we do not tolerate sectarian behaviour in this regiment. And where there are cases of sectarian behaviour brought to our attention and the soldier is found guilty, then under normal circumstances he will be dismissed the regiment.
But Panorama has investigated a number of cases which challenge the Brigadier's claim. Take, for example, the case of Soldier A, whom we won't name for fear of reprisal against him by the IRA. This court document shows that in March 1987 he was convicted of assaulting a Catholic. These statements show that he also assaulted Catholics on 2 further occasions while on duty, with his rifle and his boot. But although the Ministry of Defence paid out £1,300 damages, the assaults weren't entered on his service record, and the soldier is still in the UDR today.
If the regiment is screening soldiers for sectarian conduct as scrupulously as the regiment claims, surely this sort of information should be on his record.
That's my opinion. Obviously we do screen people, but we don't have a regimental representative sitting in every court in the land when it sits. So unless somebody formally notifies the regiment of it, we would not know about it.
Do you think it might be wise to review whether this soldier should remain in the regiment?
That is not something I feel I should discuss on television. It is, every case is looked at individually. Circumstances are different, and we will make the appropriate decision in due course of time.
But if you put yourself in the position of a Catholic person living in this area, what is that Catholic person supposed to make of the regiment when they see this man on a checkpoint and they know that he's been involved in 3 separate assaults on Catholics?
I doubt whether everybody in the Catholic population is aware of this particular individual's circumstance, but that's not the point. The point is that we do not accept in the regiment any form of sectarian behaviour at roadblocks.
Panorama has investigated a second incident involving a UDR man we'll call Soldier B and his patrol. It happened outside this farmhouse in Pomeroy. Soldier B was dismissed the regiment after being convicted of punching a young Catholic at a checkpoint here.
He had 2 bags of meal in his car, which he was...
But the local councillor wants to know why, shortly before the court case, a UDR patrol harassed the main prosecution witness, a local farmer named Mr. Quinn, and damaged his car.
I believe it was an attempt to intimidate Mr. Quinn, because he was obviously an independent and vital witness in the case against the UDR man who had struck Mr. Quinn's neighbour just across the road here.
Were there any threats to him?
I don't think there were any direct threats at that particular time, but on the following Sunday morning, in the early hours of the morning, Mr. Quinn got a phone call. When he answered the phone, a voice purporting to be the voice of the UVF told Mr. Quinn he had 2 days to get out.
When the case came to court here in Cookstown, the prosecution suggested that Soldier B's patrol had covered up for him by lying. Soldier B had told the court that far from hitting the youth, he'd neither seen nor spoken to anyone at the checkpoint. And he said that the checkpoint had been held at a different place and at a different time. Soldier B's colleagues, 2 privates and a lance corporal, all gave sworn evidence supporting his story. But the judge didn't believe them and said there'd been what he described as a sort of conspiracy.
Do you think it might not be sensible for the UDR to institute some sort of inquiry into Soldier B's colleagues, who, as far as the judge was concerned anyway, clearly hadn't been telling the truth when they had taken their oath in the witness box?
The case you're referring to, as I've said, we are reviewing it at the moment and no decision has been made. I don't at the moment see any particular reason why we should start some major inquiry into what happened or did not happen in the court.
But you surely can't have soldiers in a regiment which you claim takes such a tough and disciplined attitude to sectarian behaviour. You clearly can't have soldiers in a regiment who are prepared to go into court and give sworn evidence, untruthful sworn evidence, can you?
You are talking about what happened in the court and what was and was not said. I do not know what was or was not said. And what you are doing, of course, is you are harping on the fact that in this particular case, we have got a soldier who has been found guilty of a case. We will look at that case. I agree with you that our professional conduct should be perfect. And I actually genuinely believe that the only day our image will change is when everybody, nationalist or otherwise, as they approach a roadblock, says, who's running the vehicle checkpoint? And when they say, oh, it's the UDR, thank goodness for that, because they're now so polite and so professional, that is when our image will change. And we are now concentrating a great deal on making absolutely sure and explain to our soldiers that communicating with the public is a skill and it has to be taught. The police are very good at it. We're getting better, and we've still got room for improvement.
Sometimes the police accompany UDR patrols to take the friction out of contact with the nationalist population. Many Catholics say they've more trust in the police because they've shown they can be even-handed. Police accompaniment of UDR patrols is a long overdue reform. For 20 years, British governments have been telling Dublin the UDR operates only in support of the RUC. In 1985, at the signing of the Anglo-Irish Agreement, Britain gave an undertaking to the Irish government. The actual wording of the communiqué is now the subject of differing interpretations. It promised that all operations by the army should be accompanied by the police, save in the most exceptional circumstances. This would be accomplished as rapidly as possible. 4 years on, Britain has yet to fulfill its promise. When the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed, the RUC's Chief Constable was Sir Jack Herman. He says he'd have needed an extra 1,500 officers for the government to fulfill its promise to Dublin, but he never got the funds.
Well, where were you then expected to provide the extra manpower in order for the British government to fulfill its promise to the Irish government?
To the extent that that promise was given, we could never have fulfilled it, nor did we attempt to do it.
No, but where did the British government, where did the government expect you to find the extra men?
I'm not sure where they expected them to be found, but it was made abundantly clear to them that they could not be found within the resources which we had.
Do you think the British government had any business making these promises to the Irish government without making quite sure that you, as Chief Constable, had the manpower to deliver them?
In the listening to the wording of the communique to which you referred, I see a let-out, if I may use that phrase, by government, and there was a quiet recognition there that that would take some considerable time, certainly within their knowledge of the availability, or rather the lack of availability of resources within the RUC to fulfill it in the foreseeable future.
Well, obviously it's a breach of faith when two governments sit down and negotiate an agreement that has been recognised internationally, an agreement that has been welcomed, an agreement that, for our part, is being followed diligently and supported along the way, at very great cost, might I add. But of course, those solemn assurances were never lived up to. Those solemn assurances have never been put into practice, and I said that with very deep regret.
Why do you think that is?
because the political will wasn't there to so do.
I remind you that the commitment was qualified in the words that I've used, and the Irish government, in conversation with us, recognised that there are operational constraints and resources which need to be taken into account in making that decision.
That's a slightly different complexion that the Irish Foreign Minister, Jerry Collins, put on it to us yesterday. He regards Britain's conduct in this matter as a breach of faith.
Well, he may say things, I'm not in any way suggesting that he says different things to us, but the conversations which I have had within the conference to him, while he has put the point firmly and vigorously, has actually acknowledged that there are operational circumstances and constraints which actually have to weigh with the security forces' decisions.
Are we ever going to see full police accompaniment, save in the most exceptional circumstances?
When Mr. Collins and I have got into conversation about this, it is quite clear that he sees a shading of the agreement. In other words, although the agreement actually is phrased in the way that it is, he wishes to see particular applications of the agreement, in particular applications of the wording of the communique in particular ways, and that's something which the two governments are in fact exploring further.
Allegations of sectarian conduct by UDR soldiers must, however, be set against the IRA's sustained campaign to wipe them out.
IRA gunmen shot the part-time UDR man at point-blank range and then left behind a bomb which exploded.
IRA murders before, but last night's killing of the part-time soldier has horrified and angered them.
A UDR patrol closing the Royal Avenue security gates caught the full impact of the blast. 2 soldiers inside the vehicle stood no chance.
The gunmen opened fire. They fired several shots through the windows and body of the car, wounding him in the head, chest and back.
I'll never forget that poor fella's face. That's the truth. I'll never forget his face. But there wasn't anything I could do. I brought a rug down, a drink of water, but he wasn't able to take the water.
Mr. Nicholl, who had been in the regiment since he was a teenager, leaves a widow and a 3-year-old daughter.
182 serving and 43 former UDR soldiers have been murdered, most of them off-duty while at home or at work. 252 have been mentioned in dispatches for bravery. 15 soldiers have been decorated for gallantry. The loss of so many men and women explains why loyalists react so vigorously to critical scrutiny of a regiment they regard as theirs.
The media wield in every political cripple available to keep the ball rolling against the UDR. But we here today salute the fortitude, the integrity, the gallantry of this very brave regiment of the British Army. We are proud of our Ulster Defence Regiment, sons and daughters in our province.
Although IRA terrorism poses the greatest threat, Catholics believe the UDR focuses on it to the exclusion of loyalist terrorists who've killed 600 Catholics. The movement of suspects are logged at UDR checkpoints. Soldiers are briefed on whom to monitor. Panorama found 10 soldiers who were prepared to discuss how they're briefed. Between them, they've been on several thousand patrols in areas where both IRA and loyalist terrorists were active. 5 soldiers said they'd never been shown a picture of a loyalist suspect. 3 said they'd been shown them very rarely. 2 said they'd been shown them regularly.
We do not, as a matter of course, brief up our patrols looking for Protestant terrorists. That is the domain of the RUC. I must emphasize the role of the Ulster Defence Regiment is to support the RUC in the defeat of terrorism.
No, I'm talking about pre-patrol briefings, where the soldiers are given information about players, I think the term is, suspects active in that area, whether they're Protestant or Republican. The point I'm making is that these soldiers we've spoken to, 5 of them say they've never, ever been briefed on a Protestant suspect.
That is true. We do not give our soldiers extensive briefings on Protestant subjects.
But you do on Republican suspects.
We do on Republican suspects, that is correct.
But why should there be any difference?
The difference being that the RUC are happy to deal with Protestant extremist terrorism. It is not a specific role given to the Ulster Defence Regiment. That having been said, a recent case which you may be aware of was when, in a known nationalist area, 2 Protestant gunmen machine-gunned the drinking club. The car was rammed, and the 2 suspected terrorists were handed over to the RUC. That is how the soldiers would react when faced with terrorism from whichever section of the community it comes.
How are the Catholic community to interpret your comments that effectively the UDR seeks principally or only, I think you're saying, Republican suspects, whereas Protestant suspects are left to the police? How are the Catholic community supposed to see your protestations that the regiment has a non-sectarian and impartial approach to terrorism?
The regiment is anti-terrorist. That is our role. We do not go out each night with a sort of a photograph of the #1 guy to get that evening. We are there on the streets and on the highways and byways to defeat terrorism from whichever corner it comes.
He's obviously confused. He tells you, I gather, that he tries to deal with terrorism from all sides, and then immediately follows by saying that he only briefs his patrols on the one side of terrorist activity. Obviously, that's a recipe for disaster, but then that doesn't surprise me either.
Of the 10 soldiers we talked to, the 2 who were briefed on loyalist suspects were both NCOs. They told Panorama that intelligence wasn't always passed down to patrols because they feared soldiers might tip off their paramilitary friends. It has happened before.
Were you ever shown photographs of loyalist paramilitary suspects?
I think in all this time in the UDR, I only ever came across one photograph of a loyalist suspect.
What did you do with that photograph?
I passed it on to the commander of the EVF, who in turn passed it on to the area commander where the loyalist suspect came from.
For the purpose of what?
I suppose they just wanted the guy to know that he was known to the security forces.
Although some patrols aren't trusted with the names of Protestant suspects, all patrols are trusted with the names of Republicans. We've acquired this copy of a UDR soldier's notebook. Every UDR soldier has a notebook like this. It demonstrates the sheer volume of intelligence held by the average UDR soldier on Republicans. In this book are 281 names, many of them with their addresses, the cars they drive, and their associates. Not one of them is a Protestant. A tough system of vetting would reduce the risk of these names being leaked to loyalist assassins. But the UDR's own record of direct involvement with terrorist activity suggests the vetting system has not been tough enough. The government claims not to have figures for the number of UDR soldiers convicted of terrorist offences. They say records are not available before 1985. So Panorama combed through newspaper reports for the last 20 years. Our list is not definitive, but we found that 197 serving or former soldiers have been convicted for terrorist, sectarian and other serious offences. That includes 17 soldiers convicted for murder. 11 UDR soldiers are currently awaiting trial on charges of murder, unlawful possession of ammunition and passing information to loyalist terrorists.
Guys who are in the UDR, because of the intelligence they get, after a while they realise that most of the IRA activists are walking around the country free men. The security forces know them, and they know, in a lot of instances, they know the particular operations that they've been involved in. But through lack of evidence, they're never going to be able to convict them in the courts. And at the end of the day, there's only one way to deal with them.
I don't believe people go into the UDR with the intention of victimizing one section of the community. I think that after years of stress which goes unabated, that people actually become damaged by their experiences. As far as I'm concerned, the average member of the UDR is not some latent criminal. He is a decent person who wants to serve the community and feels that he has an obligation to the community.
However, the record of UDR soldiers can be compared with RUC police officers. The RUC have suffered even more. 267 officers have been murdered, compared with 182 UDR soldiers. But in the last 5 years, 6 police officers have been convicted of terrorist offences. There have been 21 UDR convictions. At the resort of Newcastle, County Down last November, the UDR's vetting record was discussed at a conference of the main nationalist party, the SDLP. Once again, the British government was accused of breaking a promise.
When the UDR was first proposed, Mr. Chairman, as a replacement for the then infamous B Specials, we were assured that no bigots, criminal elements, or undesirables would get through this strict vetting procedure. Obviously, Mr. Chairman, this vetting procedure has broken down.
Until he became an MP in 1983, Ken McGuinness was a major in the UDR. He concedes that vetting loopholes may have allowed in unsuitable recruits.
Again and again, I'm asked if my name can be used as a referee. Sometimes I agree, sometimes I refuse. But it doesn't really matter whether I do or not, because I'm seldom approached and asked for my opinion. Yet I'm much more likely to know the background of any person wishing to join the regiment, whether there is stability or instability, temperamental stability or instability within the family that may manifest itself when that person comes under pressure. So I criticise and have done so quite openly the vetting procedure, not insofar as it goes, but because I don't believe it goes far enough.
This man is a former UDR soldier who was convicted of a terrorist offence carried out on behalf of the paramilitary UDA. Even the most cursory check into his background would have revealed that his body was tattooed with a UDA gunman, but this slipped through the vetting system.
Did you give referees? Were you asked to provide references?
Yes, I was. I was asked to provide 3 references.
Did the UDR ever come and question those people about you, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Were they relatives, neighbours or school teacher or what?
One was a reverend and one was a policeman.
While in the UDR, the man helped plan a weapons raid from his UDR base. More than 600 weapons have been stolen from different UDR bases by soldiers and passed to loyalist terrorists. This is the home of A Company of the UDR's 1-9 battalion in Ballymena. Just how lax vetting and screening in the UDR has been is shown by a case here investigated by Panorama. For 2 years, a UVF terrorist cell operated here undetected. 7 members of one platoon, about a third of its strength, were involved. Panorama has learned that security was so slack, the area UVF commander had frequent access to a bar inside this base. This picture shows the UVF man with 2 UDR soldiers whom he recruited as terrorists. He visited the army bar for several months before the alarm was raised, even though he had known terrorist connections and a firearms conviction. This UVF man gives one reason why loyalist paramilitaries try to recruit UDR soldiers.
In what way did membership of the UDR assist your membership of the UVF?
One of the main ways that helped was the fact that we could move weapons. With the UDR man driving the car, he would get through the checkpoint, a police checkpoint, if he showed his pass. He wasn't as likely to be stopped and searched.
The 7 members of the Ballymena platoon were convicted of a range of terrorist offences in 1987, including manslaughter, robbery, illegal possession of firearms, and passing information to the UVF. The rest of the platoon said they'd never suspected anything was going on, even though they'd been on duty together regularly. But Panorama has learned that one officer in the regiment said after the arrests, Ulster will one day be grateful to these men. We have confirmed the remark with the soldier to whom it was made. The soldier was so appalled by what he'd heard, he reported the officer to his superiors. But no action was taken, and the officer remains in the regiment today.
Well, may I say, that is pure hearsay, a remark which was allegedly made 7 years ago. Whoever said that, you must have a remarkable memory, and I certainly hope it's not true.
The Army claims vetting of soldiers joining and serving in the regiment has been increasingly tightened. But as late as 1973, it was possible to be a joint member of the UDR and the paramilitary group, the UDA. The Army won't say exactly when this stopped. In 1977, an Army press statement said it was confident vetting was as fair and effective as it could be. In 1980, the Army dismissed allegations of paramilitary infiltration as insidious propaganda. In 1988, the UDR announced every serving soldier would be screened every 6 months. But an investigation of the circumstances of Lachlan McGinn's murder last August, which sparked off the Stevens inquiry, suggests the vetting system was still seriously flawed. Lachlan McGinn lived in a small farming town called Rathfriland. The police believe he gathered intelligence for the IRA. In this divided community, the symbols of loyalism are everywhere. Lachlan McGinn was a Catholic. He worked in his father's poultry business, delivering chickens to shops and restaurants across Northern Ireland. In 1981, when Lachlan McGinn was 20, the police took him in for questioning. On his release, he went to see his mother.
He was very pale and very quiet. And I asked him what was the matter. And he told me that the police had blackmailed him, what they called blackmailed him, offered him money for to infiltrate, to get into the IRA, to infiltrate the IRA and become an informer. And he was very, very frightened. Very frightened. Scared. Very scared.
Panorama has learned that Lachlan McGinn dictated an account of his interrogation to his wife immediately after he was released. In it, he claims that the police threatened he would be harassed and perhaps shot if he didn't become an informer.
If I didn't do it, they said the UDR and police would harass me all the time. They said that they would put the word round that I was in the IRA. They said that there are plenty of good loyalist Protestants who would like to take a shot at me if they thought I was involved in the IRA.
Lachlan McGinn's family say he didn't become an informer and that both police predictions, that he would be harassed and shot, came true. The family say the security forces sometimes scattered the contents of their car boot on the road. Mrs. McGinn was stopped so often she gave up driving. On occasions, Lachlan McGinn was stopped several times within a few hundred yards. In the last 20 months of his life, he was prosecuted 12 times for traffic offences. On the 9th of November 1988, Lachlan McGinn claimed his life was threatened when he was stopped outside Newry by a UDR patrol.
He was a very nervous, very agitated and very concerned man. And he asked us to write in specific terms and to outline the exact threat that had been made to his life. And if I might quote from the letter which we wrote at the time, quote the words which were used by the UDR soldier to Mr. McGinn. He said, quote, "I have a wee word of warning. I'll stiff you when I get the chance," unquote. Now, in Northern Ireland parlance, stiff means I'll kill you when I get the chance.
This confidential security force document shows special branch intelligence from several sources that Lachlan McGinn had been heavily traced as a provisional IRA suspect. He was never charged, but at some stage the document was leaked to loyalist terrorists. Some weeks before Lachlan McGinn was shot, a stranger on a motorbike was seen near his council estate asking neighbours about his movements. In the early hours of August the 25th, Lachlan McGinn and his wife were watching television. Their 4 children were asleep upstairs. A car carrying a gunman pulled into the McGinn's estate. The time was a few minutes before 1 o'clock. The gunman ran to the front window, smashed the glass, and began firing. Neighbours were woken by the commotion, as this woman's account recalls.
My husband jumped up and said, "They're shooting. There's somebody shooting someone." I opened the window and I could smell all the gun smoke. Little Jenny came, Maureen and Lockie's daughter. She was screaming, "Please help my daddy. He's bleeding everywhere. Help my daddy." And I got there. I just followed the trail of blood, and he was at the top of the stairs.
I expected it from 1981. It's as if someone was sitting with their finger on the trigger from 1981, September 81, till August 1989.
Terrorists connected with the paramilitary UDA claimed the killing. In the hunt that followed, 2 members of the UDR were arrested for colluding with terrorists. In our investigation into the circumstances of this killing, we've looked into the background of one of the soldiers charged. We wish to state unequivocally, his guilt or innocence is not the subject of this program. Our sole purpose is to highlight how the UDR's vetting and screening procedures continued to be flawed, despite all the regiment's previous reassurances. At a court hearing, Crown Counsel said the soldier had admitted to police he'd named McGinn to the UDA as an IRA suspect and that he'd conducted surveillance on him. But the soldier's lawyer disputed the Crown's account. He said his client had made it clear to the police he'd been an unwilling helper. Like many UDR men, the soldier lived with loyalist paramilitaries in the neighbourhood. The court heard the soldier's windows had been smashed more than once. It's well known that on such estates, paramilitaries sometimes try to pressurize UDR men to collaborate with them. The soldier's lawyer told the court the UDA had threatened if he didn't cooperate, he'd be sorted out. The soldier reported the attacks on his flat to his battalion headquarters here in Belfast. We've also learned the battalion had been told by his mother and an army doctor he was suffering from severe stress. Knowing the soldier was vulnerable, the UDR could have swiftly rehoused him, but this wasn't done. The question is, why didn't the UDR heed these warnings? At the time, there was no special regimental screening unit dedicated to checking the paramilitary links of serving soldiers. Despite the record of collusion by some soldiers with loyalist terrorists going back 20 years, no such special screening unit was established until last autumn. Why has, again, such a fundamental, elementary step taken 20 years to introduce?
Well, that is, if I may say so, a question which is quite difficult for somebody to answer who's only actually arrived in the province within the past 6 months. What we have is the unit which you described. It has a role in terms of looking at people who are recruited or seeking to be recruited into the regiment, and it has a role in looking at people who are nominated from within the command as to who might require further screening. But that's a decision, in my view, of a thoroughly practical and constructive kind, and I'm delighted the unit's in place.
But do you think it should have been a decision taken many years ago in hindsight?
I've never been a man for looking over my shoulder at things I've done myself, and I'm certainly not going to start doing it in the case of the decisions of others.
Sir Jack Herman has worked side by side with the UDR, but tonight he makes a radical proposal. The police, he says, should have the last word on whom the regiment recruits. So you want the police to have a veto on who is taken into the UDR?
Within the context of which I've now described, leaving professional matters to the soldiers, but in terms of integrity, I believe that should rest more squarely with the Royal Ulster Constabulary, who are better qualified to do in-depth assessments as we do for our own members. I think looking at it maturely and responsibly, it would receive serious consideration and should only be avoided for the most valid of reasons. I believe it would help the UDR and the RUC. who are carrying the brunt of the security pressure here.
Since there have been quite a number of disasters while vetting has been in the hands of the army, might it not be sensible to hand it over to the police?
No, there is a, forgive me, there is an RUC input into that.
A final veto.
There is an RUC input into that process.
But not a veto.
It is likely that RUC input will in fact be sharpened as a result of the setting up of the special unit.
That's not what Sir Jack's saying. He's saying give the RUC a veto.
Yes, I heard it. I heard it. And the decision as to who enters a regiment of the British Army should actually be taken by the British Army.
But why, when their record to date hasn't been that glorious?
But forgive me, you're commenting on a number of cases, and it's a small number of cases, of people who have let down the standards of the regiment. It is in response to the events of last summer that the special screening unit was in fact set up.
In their Anglo-Irish talks, Peter Brook and Jerry Collins have developed a good working relationship. But the UDR is now a fraught issue between them.
At the end of the day, we're going to have a good meeting.
Dublin has told Mr. Brook they don't see how it's possible for soldiers drawn almost exclusively from one section of Northern Ireland's divided community to act as impartial peacekeepers. They would prefer to see the regiment gradually replaced by an expanded RUC.
So you would like to see the UDR phased out?
I certainly must say it like this to you, that they have no role to play as they're constituted at the present time under the way they're operating.
Do you think there can ever be peace in Northern Ireland with the UDR constituted in its present form?
I'm afraid I could not see it happening.
Why not?
Because, as I say, the people do not regard them as a force that they can depend on, as a force that they can have respect for, a force whose credibility is highly questioned, more so now than ever before.
If the UDR is regarded, as it is by very many Catholic people and politicians, and certainly the Dublin government, as a kind of Protestant militia and an impediment to reconciliation, why hang on to it?
You are, if I may say so, branding a force of 6,500 men and women of extreme courage who put in, to take a single statistic, 11 million man-hours spent out of bed every year on behalf of the community. That very brave body of men and women constitute some kind of obstacle to the overall issue of confidence. The role they fulfill is key. Where there is behaviour that falls below the highest standards of the regiment, then it should quite clearly be punished immediately.
In its 20-year history, the UDR has trained nearly 40,000 Protestants in how to use a gun. The UDR's staunch defenders in Northern Ireland remind London and Dublin that without the regiment, Protestants will find other ways of defending themselves.
It would be the signal for the increase in a loyalist paramilitary activity, and indeed perhaps for the setting up of other paramilitary organizations, because a people have the right to defend themselves against terrorism.
Isn't one of the reasons, perhaps even the main reason, that the British government won't give ground to Catholics on the UDR is because 20 years on, something like 40,000 men have been trained, professionally trained, in the use of weapons. And that if you were to disband the UDR, it's inevitable that some of these men would go with their expertise into Protestant terrorist groups.
Well, if I may say so, that's a hypothesis that we're not going to pursue. The UDR is an integral part of the British Army and will continue to be so. So the idea that it is in fact going to be disbanded, for which the Irish government have not themselves asked, is not actually a working part of anybody's scenario.
To loyalists, the UDR fulfills a crucial historical role, the right of the Protestant people to defend themselves. To nationalists, its mere existence fuels the IRA it's there to defeat. But unless this regiment of Protestants can earn the trust of Catholics, it will remain forever part of the problem it was intended to solve.